Today, we're going to talk about grading card companies once again, specifically to understand and talk through what benefit are we actually getting as a collector, flipper, investor, whatever it is that you are out of them, right? What service are they actually giving us? Because I think people have lost their way a little bit within this hobby and they don't realize they're not as protected as what they actually are. And I mentioned, a week or so ago, we'd do a video like this and I've got, 3 questions that we'll go through at the end, 3 scenarios on how you could be exposed with each of the big 4 grading companies, because I don't think people think through this as much as what they probably should. And it sort of concerns me thinking about, friends and people that I see on social media that have, all this money into sports cards, into trading cards that could literally go up in smoke if one of these businesses collapses, or, if something goes wrong with the cards you got graded, you might not actually be as covered as what you think they are by using one of these services. And I think that is a very important thing to talk to. And the reason why I think this is important is because when you use a service like this, whether it be PSA, BGS, CGC, SGC, I consider those the big 4, you're inherently thinking you're getting some value out of them, right? You're either submitting a card to one of these businesses because you want to keep it for your PC and you want them to sort of sign off on the authentication, right? To give you comfort that if something was to ever go wrong, you've got a high-end card or something along those lines, that you're covered because they've said it's real. They're going to give you a guarantee because you've paid for them a service. They've said your card is real. You're protected in some capacity, right? You have some insurance. Or you might be somebody that's buying one of these cards with the intention to flip long term for the same reasons, right? And you're going to one of these services, you've bought the slab for that specific reason. Or you're submitting something to sell, right? You're basically sent it to a business because you want to get that comfort from them. You want to get that sign off that the card is authentic, it's free from error, it's genuine, it's unaltered, to give you and your customers more comfort, right? More support that the thing itself is genuine and that you should be spending your money on it, right? Those are the things, at least, that I think through when I want to try and use one of these services. But unfortunately, it's not that clear cut when you read the terms and conditions, when you read the policies of each of these businesses, and people often get burned off the back of that, right? We spoke about a particular card a week ago that was sold on PWCC's platform. And again, you as a customer wanting to buy something on PWCC or buy something on Golden or on eBay on one of these auction sites also think you're protected because you're using those services. And outside of eBay, the other ones are maybe not as strong as what you think either, because you go to PWCC, you go to Golden, you buy a graded card, that graded card ends up being mislabeled, it ends up being fake, right? It comes out later on. You go back to those auction houses where you bought the card and they say, well, hang on a minute, we don't give you comfort over this, we don't guarantee the card itself, please go talk to the grader. Or they'll talk to the grader on your behalf and the grader says, well, sorry, we don't have a guarantee, or sorry, we don't look at this sort of stuff, or sorry, you are, not the original submitter, so you're sort of shit out of luck. That kind of stuff happens, right? And then you're burned basically holding a card that's probably worth thousands of dollars, if not more, that is now worth, $0, right? You paid thousands of dollars, at least is what I meant to say, and now it's worth $0. We literally spoke about that the other day, and that sort of sparked my interest in putting a video like this together. And I will share, some scenarios with you now, and I want you guys to, drop your thoughts down below as we do go through them as well, because like I said, grading is, at least in my opinion, done to give that inherent comfort, right? To give that comfort that what I'm buying, what I'm submitting, what I'm grading is what it is, right? It gives me that comfort to make sure that I maybe don't get burned, that sort of insurance capability behind it. And this first scenario is obviously a good one to talk to, given that we touched on it at the start of the week, as I just referenced. There's a few things I want to clarify very quickly up front. You'll see a little note down the bottom that says, whilst some graders may not define a guarantee, there are examples of them applying a payout/correction to a customer. So please, take my assessment of their terms and conditions and their policies, with a grain of salt, because there are always exceptions to this kind of stuff. And in particular, SGC and Beckett don't clearly define a guarantee, but both of those companies have in the past helped out customers, SGC far more than BGS have, given, some of the topics we've talked to on this channel. But the first question basically says, what if I buy a card that's later deemed mislabeled? And the PSA one straight off the bat stands out, right? Because they don't give a guarantee. Their guarantee does not apply to clerical errors, and they consider mislabels, parallel set names, or anything like that as a clerical error, which is, incredibly unfortunate. And based on the person who bought that card we spoke about at the start of the week, they're sort of screwed because they bought, a 1961 Eusebio rookie, who's a sort of a Portugal legend, very rare vintage soccer sticker that PSA labeled as a 1961. They bought it, but it since came to light that it was a 1971 rookie. And whilst, you can tell by looking at the back of the sticker, it's quite a rare sticker. So customers will be a bit confused on the whole situation. And you being someone that's gone ahead and bought a PSA slab thinking, well, they've done their work, we can rely on them, but they've actually made a mistake, you're not covered in that instance. And that's a very important thing to keep front of mind. If you have other things like that within your collection or your inventory as a seller, do I have things in there that could be mislabeled that PSA now not going to cover me for? What does my exposure look like? What does my liability look like as an individual having that stuff in my collection? Can you afford for all of that stuff overnight to sort of be worth nothing? And that's sort of what you're looking at here, because in that specific example, that was a $4,000 card that's now worth 30 or 40 bucks. And by all reports, the correspondence that this customer got back from PSA is, sorry, we can't do anything. And you also don't get any benefit from going to PWCC either. So it's just a really unfortunate situation. And you've got a green tick there for CGC because their guarantee does mention, mislabels and clerical errors, but it only applies in instances where it's not an obvious error. And they define an obvious error for cards as being where they've graded a card a CGC 10, and then you bought that card, but clearly by looking at the card, you know it's not a 10. It's more like it's a 1, right? Essentially, it's saying it's a very big and clear and obvious error on their part, right? They're not going to protect you in that instance, right? Because they expect some, common sense on the buyer's perspective, right? But if it's something like that, you Saber rookie, by all reports, CGC would be covering the customer, giving a guarantee for that customer, which I think is a good thing and sort of stands by why you use that service in the first place. You've then got SGC with a big red no, because their policy states that only a submitter can submit a claim when it comes to a mislabel error, and you only have 5 days within receipt of the graded cards back from them in order to do that. And this is sort of where that caveat comes, right? Because I've talked to this on the channel many times. They often come out, proactively to try and rectify things for customers. And SGC Pete, their CEO, has come out multiple times and made videos talking about very specific instances. But the thing that's worth calling out here is that their policy doesn't make any inference either way on a guarantee in any shape or form, right? So there's nothing in writing that explicitly says you are protected. Now, there might be some things when it comes to submitting a card yourself, but in their T's and C's and in their Q&A on their website, there's nothing specifically mentioned other than the fact that if you have an issue with the grade or the holder or a mislabel, you have to submit it back to them, and it's only applicable if you are the submitter, i.e. the person sending in the cards to get graded, and you have to do it within 5, business days of getting the cards back, which is a very important call out. And, next on the list, you might be surprised to see a big green tick there for BGS, given the fact that we've been really critical of them in the past, especially with some of these vintage soccer stuff where they've, had numerous issues and left customers burned. But mislabels are the only thing you're allowed to dispute with them as a customer. It doesn't matter whether you are the submitter or a prospective buyer, i.e. somebody submitted it and they've sold it to you. You can actually put a claim into them, and mislabels are the only thing that you can submit for a dispute for grading. So they won't do that for anything else. But if you have an issue like that, you say, and you say, well, I bought this card, you guys said it was a 1961 rookie, but it's actually the 1971 reprint. You can submit a claim for that. Whether they're going to protect you in that instance and actually give you some kind of compensation is left to be decided, right? You just sort of need to just see what happens when you do submit a card. But that's the only thing they'll let you submit regarding a dispute with a grade or the authenticity of a card. Now, again, there are exceptions, as it does say in that note at the bottom of this page, but do you really want to rely on an exception, when you're investing so much money into these sports cards and into your collection, all that kind of stuff? And keep that in mind with the second question, because it then goes on to say, well, what if I submit a card, it's graded and later confirmed fake or altered? So, years down the line, oh, hang on a minute, this card's fake. Well, unfortunately, PSA explicitly state within their guarantee that it does not apply if you are the person submitting the card. So if you're submitting it, you're shit out of luck. If you're buying it, you're okay. CGC protect both the submitter and the buyer. I mentioned this in a video the other day, which is why they protect you from a guarantee perspective. It's why I mentioned, like I said, I submitted my flawless soccer cards because whilst I'm incredibly comfortable that they are all genuine because I've bought them from reputable places, I want that protection that I opened the video with, right? I want that protection to get it graded to, number one, protect the card from getting damaged. Number two, to have them sign off on the fact that it's authentic. That then gives me some kind of comfort down the line that I can either sell it, if something was to go wrong in my financial life, right? Personally, that I needed to get some money quickly, that would then give comfort to a prospective buyer, right? I'm protected in that instance. SGC and Beckett both know. And it's just, again, an interesting one to keep both front of mind. And I have that asterisk there for SGC specifically because you again have that 5 business days if you are the submitter to push back against them and say, I think there's an issue here. But I think if it comes out later than that, there's nothing explicitly stated within their policy. Similar to what I just mentioned, they do make exceptions for that kind of stuff. But again, is that something you want to be relying upon? And I will say this quickly, SGC seems a lot better at making exceptions to their policy than what Beckett does, because I'm getting, dozens of stories throughout the year and every year basically around Beckett sort of leaving customers burned because they've bought a fake card, for example. But I don't really hear that from SGC. And what I've seen on social media as well is that SGC, again, as I mentioned earlier, seem to go out of their way to make sure that customers are looked after. But again, do you want to rely on that? And we'll get to the third and final question now that goes on to say, well, what if I buy a card that's later confirmed to be fake or altered? So, the first one relates to buying. The second one relates to if you're submitting a card. This one is if you're buying a graded card, i.e. somebody looking to flip things, or you're buying off your collection, whatever, right? You're buying a card that's already graded. And as I just mentioned, PSA and CGC do protect customers in that instance, because PSA, like I said, don't protect the submitter, but they do protect an owner of the card as long as you're not the original submitter. So whilst they do have green ticks there and their policy explicitly states they have a guarantee, it's also worth keeping in front of mind. There are always exceptions to how they go ahead and apply this. There are rules around, market value and how many times you can use the service in your lifetime. I think PSA limit it to 250K in your lifetime, and you can only do it twice or something along those lines. But the likes of SGC and Beckett, again, don't have it explicitly stated. Now, I've got an asterisk there for SGC, just because I'm not sure if that 5 business day rule also applies if you're buying the card from somewhere and you can prove the date of purchase, because like I just said on the last page, if you're the submitter, you have 5 business days or 5 days to put a claim in back to them saying you guys have graded a fake card, you made an error, all that sort of stuff. I'm not sure if that also applies, if you're a buyer of a card from an eBay page or, an auction site or anything like that. And I think, the position to take is, well, you assume that it's not there, right? You assume you're not covered because their policy doesn't mention it. Again, like I said on the last question, do you really want to leave that up to chance? So that's quite an important thing to look at when it comes to these questions. And again, I've read their terms and conditions, I've read their policies. There might be things that I've missed, so please don't take this as factual or anything like that. You're going to have to read the pages for yourself. But from the information that I could interpret, because it does get very, lawyery in terms of the wording and all that kind of stuff, CGC seems to be the one that explicitly is going to protect you better than the rest. Because from their perspective, their guarantee doesn't care whether you are the submitter or the buyer. They seem to be the ones that explicitly give you the most comfort. And for me, being somebody that, wants to make sure my risk is best managed, right? I've talked to this before. I have a family, right? I grew up quite poor, so a lot of my collection is funded by flipping. So the last thing I sort of want is to invest all this money into a collection, into a passion that, overnight could literally become worthless because a company was incompetent. Like what we're seeing with BGS, right? We've mentioned BGS many times about the vintage soccer issue and how they grade so many fake cards. But, what would happen if Beckett, had that issue and it was more pervasive into other sports and not just vintage soccer, but into basketball, football, all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden people actually clued onto the fact, well, hang on a minute, it's not just soccer, it's actually the stuff that I buy as well, and they have issues. What's going to happen then when you've got all this money in these slabs out there, this infatuation with using Beckett, albeit not as much as what it was in the past, and all of a sudden they're not worth anything and they're not going to give you a guarantee? That's going to make the market tank drastically. The same thing with people that have submitted so many, PSA slabs. You're sort of fine if you sell them, but if you've got a huge collection, you've submitted everything to PSA thinking, well, they give you the best market value, so I can sell it and maximize my profit and all that kind of stuff. Well, unfortunately, you can't sell it if they were to all of a sudden have a big issue, because then you're basically not qualifying for the guarantee because you are the submitter, and then people might not want to be buying your card for that same reason as well, because they actually think, well, PSA has huge issues. Now, PSA do get a caveat there because they do protect buyers. So that risk is sort of mitigated. You can buy it and then basically still make a claim. So you're sort of safe as a seller and a buyer in that instance. But if you're not intending to sell your collection, you're sort of screwed in that instance. And again, with SGC, they get a lot of love as being a grader that's for the collectors, and they grade consistently and all that kind of stuff. But the guarantee is not explicitly stated within their terms and conditions. It's a bit vague. Is that something you're comfortable living with, right? Having your collection be like that? And it's just odd that when you look at it through that lens, and then you look at what people actually do for these graders, or how they sort of become fanboys for certain graders, or how they sort of chase certain graders, or how they're so comfortable with PSA being so much better than CGC, it makes you wonder, guys, do you actually understand how you're protected? Are you comfortable as a business flipping cards to be exposed like that with Beckett, with CGC, with SGC, with PSA, with any of them? That's up to you for you guys to make up your own mind. But for me, I know where my comfort sits, and whilst CGC could play games, and this is not meant to be favoriting, CGC, but they sort of give me the benefit for why it is I want to use a grader in the first place. I want somebody to sign off on what I'm grading. I want somebody to sign off that it's authentic. I want them to sign off that it's unaltered and give me that insurance that if something was to go wrong, I can go to them and say, guys, this thing that you said, was genuine. You've basically said it's not. So what's going on? Help me out here. I'm protected in that instance. Because the worst thing that could happen, being someone like me that, collects cards the way that I do on a budget and all that kind of stuff, have something that they've stuffed up on that I can no longer sell, it is now worthless, I could at least go back to them and say, well, give me my market value for this card. And the market value could be crap, but at least it's something. So, like I said, make up your own mind, do your own research, read those T's and C's yourself. Don't take my word for it. There are always exceptions. There's always probably things that I've misread or misinterpreted. But from my reading of them, that's where things look like they stand for me. So keep that in mind when you are grading cards, when you're buying stuff, and let me know, have you thought about it from that perspective before? And why do you think people are not looking at it through that lens? So as always, thanks guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.